table of the day. We've called this conversation Past Futurisms, and we have several of the artists who have joined us from across the world today for the biennial. We have Agustina Woodgate, Francois Knoetze, Fyerool Darma, Nolan Oswald Dennis, Ximena Garrido-Lecca, and Yun Choi. We've called this table Past Futurisms because somehow their works in very different medias, formats, and aesthetics, they all focus on movements of materials, minerals, plants, people, or information. And they do so in order to challenge Western or mainstream ideas of progress and development in order to propose other ideas of progress and development that are more rooted in local histories that contend with Western ideas. So in a way, what they are all doing is proposing this idea of different futures, and that's why we've come up with the term past futurisms, and we'll speak about this a little bit later. They will all briefly present their works, and then we'll follow up with a very informal conversation. And we invite you to participate of this conversation after we finish their presentations. So if you have any questions in the meantime, please afterwards raise your hand, and we'll invite you to participate. So first up is Agustina Woodgate, who is joining us here from many different places, actually. Argentina originally, but now from Amsterdam.
Hi, hola, Sophie. Thank you for having me here, and thank you everyone for coming. So my work is the very first one in the first floor. As soon as you enter the museum, it's a two-part work. On a table, you'll see a 550-page atlas of the world that has been hand-sanded over the course of an entire year. And every page now is almost white, just revealing a very subtle ghost of the ink that was once in the papers. And on the screens right next to this book, there is what looks like an animation, but it actually is an AI model that is live, receiving the information from a camera that is set right above the book, that is scanning each of these pages and trying to redraw the cartography, except that there is not much information for this artificial intelligence to pick up. So the results on the screens are quite an abstracted image, and they are ever shifting. So every time the page flipper turns the page, the AI begins again with the new page. This work was, the first book was done in 2012. And when the Biennale invited me to exhibit with the book, it was an opportunity for me to also look back 10 years, what I've done. And there was a motivation to make the book accessible through a page flipper, an automatic book that will, an automatic device that will flip the pages so that all the pages could be seen, so that the time and the labor that was done to the book could become somewhat visible. In the process of developing this automatic mechanism, I wanted it to archive each page, and with really enriching conversations with Sofía about archive and the importance of archiving and the perhaps impossibility of archiving the maps in a real form, given that they are constantly changing, was an inspiration to then develop an AI that would constantly intend to redraw this map, however, never repeating the image. So all the images that you see downstairs in the screens will never be the same and will never be able to be generated again. By the end of the exhibition, I will have archived the book with 300 1,000 images, each one of them being completely different, even though they're all coming from the same map. So there's somewhat a looking into the book and taking inspiration from my manual labor of undoing the geography that is being replicated virtually in this way that is in constant shift, now proposing perhaps a dynamic atlas instead of such a static, printed, and immediately outdated result.
Hi. Hello. Okay. So my work is titled Landscapes Beyond X Chinoti, or one can also reread it as I Had Landscapes Beyond No Chinoti. And it's actually like a play also on the words of landscapes and thinking about how emojis could also be used as the new language or words in languaging. But at the same time also like the translation that happens in the works were itself a series of unmapping, mapped visual vocabulary that already existed in the World Wide Web at the present moment, where exercises of extraction already happen during and also post coloniality and the most contemporaneous moment. And at the same time, thinking along the lines of how do I deterritorialize certain readings to just allow that moment for it to be misread, so that that exercise on obfuscating a certain categorization could be escaped. This is also to think of the material of the vinyl that is becoming contagious in our contemporary society, a synthesis of many materials that goes through several periods of industrialization and to what it is today also. And I think of polyvinyl chloride as another metaphor also for skin, because it's also like in the language of advertising that these advertisers would always use that to, what do you call that, obfuscate the immediate natural skin of the material, like say for concrete or metal and everything else also. And it is also another synonym for me to think about interface and how does one interfaces with the screen. So it's this stratas of ideas that the work can explore also. And if you look into several modes of the so-called like fake screens that I made, which is actually a painting and a drawing, they were actually not conceived by me, but conceived by a network of strangers that turn to friends and interlocutors who I've had been in dialogue with for the past 5 years to think through about what are the possible ways of just living and making art. I think this is like the most intuitive moment and the most urgent moment, I think, this period also, to think about the pattern wars that we are experiencing now. And it's just to find ways to connect, you know, beyond the parameters of that screen life that we are constantly living in also. And I'm based in Singapore, so like the, what do you call that, like the internet and real time is kind of like blurred. You are constantly like moving and shifting into different territories also. At the same time also in reality, like I do like shift into like different borders or plateaus, if I can put it that way, either by walking or by automobiles or by boats. So it's this kind of like multitudes of movements that I constantly like what do you call that, like embed in my mind. And when we constantly conceive any moments of work, apart from the manual labor that I conceive together with an individual, there's a rhythm that we would start off with. And that rhythm actually like is informed by an earlier oral tradition that's called pantun, where it follows a certain scientific moment of 1122. In the contemporary sense, one can think of it as a rap, but in the 1800s, it was what they call that mistranslated as pantoum by several French literati groups. But it's not an exercise in reclaiming, but it's an exercise to start thinking and in creating a certain crevice where certain moments of languaging could exist within the current time also, I guess.
So yeah, hi everyone. My name is Francois Knoetze. I'm a performer, a sculptor, and a new media artist based in Cape Town, South Africa. I make sculptural costumes, installations, and experimental video works that incorporate found footage, performance documentation, and interviews. I'm also part of a collective called the Low Def Film Factory, which focuses on co-creation and community storytelling. At the museum, I'm presenting a work called Core Dump, which is a 4-channel video, as well as a sculptural installation made of locally sourced e-waste. The project maps the tendrils of digital colonialism, linking the dazzling kind of virtual reality tech utopias of the cloud to landscapes of material reality, which are often obscured by the light of these utopias. My work explores questions such as, what memories are embedded in the circuitry of these discarded objects? In what ways are Silicon Valley multinationals a continuation of the imperial project of Europe from the 15th century onwards? How are local and regional myths used to make sense of the uncertainty of the digital age? How does the language we use to describe technology limit the way we use it, or the use it has for us? Who owns the means of computing, and how do we disrupt this? So Core Dump is split into 4 chapters. Each chapter explores kind of a different juncture in the supply chain of digital tech. First chapter begins in the neoliberal extraction enclaves of the DR Congo, where the soil is rich in rare earth minerals that are used to make phones and laptops, and yet the country is very scarce in terms of internet access and access to these same technologies that are so that couldn't exist without the country's resources. We then move to the circuit board manufacturing hubs of Shenzhen in China, where suicide nets surround Apple factory workers' hostels. We then go to the New York chapter, which contrasts how Wall Street investment bankers are able to completely escape accountability and kind of determine the value of these commodities, while on the street level, marginalized communities face violence from a militarized police service for minor offenses. And finally, we conclude on the e-waste dump sites on the western coast of Africa, where e-waste from the US and from Europe are exported, causing heavy metals to seep into the water systems of these places and also into the bloodstreams of the people that are living here and working here. I'm interested in kind of how these technologies can, or how they make us think about the future, or what if it's kind of useful to have them as markers of the future, if there's such an ordeal in the production of them, and if it's such a difficult thing to kind of recycle. These conglomerations of different materials and plastics and metals from all over the world, and they're made to break. You know, they're designed to be obsolete, so that the next iPhone comes out, that we are here to like pick it up.
Hi, my name is Nolan. Presenting 2 works in the biennial in the museum. The first is called Atopia Field, and it's a floor diagram that's rendered in this exhibition as a carpet. The work kind of comes out of an interest in a history of kind of post-colonial imaginary maps in Africa, but in many parts of the world. There's kind of ongoing practice of reimagining and rewriting territorial borders. This is sometimes violent, sometimes aspirational. And my interest in these maps is partly also related to their materiality, because these are maps which are very rarely drawn. They're not kind of cartographic, but they exist primarily as like manifestos, policy statements, political statements. And so this work, Atopia Field, tries to map these not as kind of a landscape of territorial gestures, so cartographic marks, borders, geographic features, but map them according to the ideas that animate these maps. So these maps are, and this process of rethinking borders is often driven by a kind of relations that are more relations of ideas than relations of geography. And so the floor diagram has drawn fragments of ideas, statements, and put them into some kind of relationship, interrelations, which are drawn from this history, but which present a possibility which is in some way non-geographic and imaginary. The work is also meant to be inhabited, so it's not really a work that works best when you look at it, but you're kind of invited to step onto the carpet and sit on it, and in some way I imagine this as an act of kind of participating in meaning making and participating in kind of determining the significance of the kind of remapping practice that this work is drawn from. So I invite you all to be a little bit brave and to walk on the carpet. You don't need to take your shoes off. You can in some way kind of violate the sanctity of the object, because the work itself is not really an object. The object is a way to think about the practices.
You can also lay on it, so it's a very pleasant way of inhabiting that world, also very comfortable. So you can step on it, but you have some very comfortable pillows. You can lay on it, take a rest, and then continue through the exhibition.
It definitely works best if you are horizontal, I think, yeah? So yeah, and the second work is, it's called Isivivani, which is a Zulu word, which is my home language, which refers to a kind of sacred pile of stones, a practice of producing sacred piles of stones. The word Isivivani is also the word that we use for collective work or working together. And the work is a pair of 3D printers which are producing throughout the run of the exhibition a collection of rocks that were collected in South Africa but come from all around the world, come from research institutions all around the world, and the 3D models that are being printed are all kind of, you'd say, like research quality scans of geological samples. And again, with this work, I think there's a kind of ambiguity about the kind of materiality. There's an ambiguity about the maybe the significance of the landscape, and in the way that I think about it. This work came out of long conversations with geologists. I start to understand that there's a kind of ambiguous relationship between the material of the landscape and our understanding of the landscape, our relations to the landscape. And so this work tries to, in some way, perform that ambiguity, which also maybe asks something of the museum, to think about an artwork in the museum not as something that is for kind of contemplation and observation, but an artwork in the museum as something that is working, the museum as a site of like production. And somewhere in the kind of ambiguity and the maybe very light transgression of this Biennale, of both of these Biennale works, I think there's somewhere there the kind of politics and the poetics of my practice.
Hi, my name is Ximena Garrido-Lecca, and I am a Peruvian artist. Here at the Biennale, I have a sculpture in the 3rd floor. And this sculpture is part of a series of works that I developed in 2022 and titled Protomorphisms. And basically, it follows an investigation on early data storage systems, and especially the development of core rope memory, and how the process of making this core rope memory is very similar to artisanal and manual labor processes of weaving. And also how in the process of the production of these core rope memories, there was always a presence of women that in many cases had been kind of erased throughout the history of modern science. So firstly, when I was working around the ideas of this project, I was reading also this essay of Ivan Illich, this Austrian philosopher that also eradicated in Mexico. The essay is called The Social Construction of Energy. And basically, it's this idea of how energy kind of develops from the idea, from the invention of science, from the idea of it being like this living force related to the earth and to the mother earth and to the womb, and this like feminine kind of idea and notion of the energy. And then it became this patriarchal kind of idea of energy like a commodity. And also throughout my work, I'm interested in the relation between culture and nature, and how from industrialization this kind of relation has been kind of interrupted somehow, and how in Andean culture this is still very relevant, and it's kind of a very solid structure of the social life and the way that the community is constructed, like in an IU, like every part of nature is part of the community, like the stones, the stars, everything is part of their community. So, and well, other kind of readings that I have been interested in is related with textiles and the anthropology of textiles, and especially something that comes to mind is Gary Urton's The Social Life of Numbers, which talks about how in the Andean culture also all the arithmetical and mathematical logic is related to their social constructions. So, for example, number 1 is also the same word as mother, and this kind of relates also with a weaving, and how in the weaving it is also seen as a sort of process of creating a living being, the act of weaving itself, you know, and the loom has different parts that are very vital in the different processes of weaving. So, and also how all these different subtleties in the textile, like not only like the trama, how do you say that? The pattern, but also like the texture and the material that it's used, the fibers, the colors, the way it's twilled. All of these different elements and factors are kind of also communicating and kind of can be seen as a data storage system, which is also proven now through the quipus, no, the knots. The quipu is these archaeological artifacts that have been found that actually they're like a series of strings with knots of different sorts and different materials also, and it has always been said that they were more like a system of numerical system of like counting like livestock or something, but recently there have been studies that prove that actually they do contain data that is not numerical. So yeah, well, going back to the work at the biennial, this particular sculpture is called Protomorphism AGC Apollo Guidance Computer Rope Driver Module, and basically I worked with in collaboration with an electronic engineer who helped me kind of trace the circuit diagram of the Apollo guidance component, which is the rope driver model, which communicates to the core memory, and basically I followed this diagram and replace each one of the cables with a thread that was handmade with using different fibers in my studio, and representing this in a whole kind of different way.
안녕하세요. 저는 최윤이고요. Thank you, Rachel and Sofía. 그리고 그 비엔날레 팀들에게 너무 감사드리고요. 저는 3층 소서문 분관에 그 마음이 가는 길 비디오 연작과 그리고 게시물 벼와 옹달샘이라는 이제 평면 작업, 그리고 파티션 구비와 비탈외 5점 이렇게 영상과 설치 작업으로 참여를 하고 있습니다. 마음이 가는 길이라는 영상 작업은 동명의 설치 작업을 기반으로 한 작업인데요. 한국 사회에서 뭐 온라인과 오프라인, 그리고 전통과 기술, 혹은 뭐 굉장히 초고속과 뭐 힐링, 혹은 뭐 촌스러움과 뭐 모던함 등이 굉장히 복잡하게 혼재되어 있는 사회에서 우리가 마주하는 어떤 혼돈과 망설임, 거기서부터 나오는 환멸감을 통해서 한국 사회 혹은 우리가 우리의 마음이 가는 길은 어디인가라고 질문하는 작업이에요. 그래서 영상은 그 전시장에서 이렇게 발현한 어떤 다수의 정령들이 5편의 시를 읊으면서 진행이 되고요. 그 5편의 시 중 하나가 계시라는 제목의 시인데 그 부분을 또 가지고 와서 이번에 그 게시판이라는 작업을 설치를 하게 되었어요. 게시판 벼와 옹달샘이라는 작업은 제가 온라인과 오프라인 상에 뭐 공공장소에 있는 걸려있는 게시판도 있지만 뭐 온라인 상에 여러 게시물들과 커뮤니티의 게시판들이 있는데 거기서 게시물들을 이제 보는 일을 굉장히 즐겨 하는데요. 그 중에 그 온라인 커뮤니티의 게시물들 중에 그 벼농사 짓는 법 아시는 분이라는 제목의 글이 하나 있었어요. 혹시 여기서 벼농사 짓는 법 아시는 분 있으신가요? 약간 그런 되게 좀 생뚱맞은 질문의 제목의 게시글이었는데 거기에 이제 몇 개 답변이 막 달리는 거예요. 근데 뭐 그 답변을 살펴보니까 뭐 씨앗을 뿌리고 뭐 모내기를 하고 추수를 하고 근데 그 후에 그걸 그냥 복붙해서 어디든지 갖다 붙일 수 있어요. 이런 식으로 막 대답을 하는 거예요. 그러니까 살펴보니까 뭔가 실제 벼농사도 있지만 가상 뭐 게임이라든지 어떤 가상 현실에서의 벼농사를 굉장히 혼재한 상태에서 이게 답변이 굴러가면서 이야기가 진행되는 걸 보고 좀 재밌다고 생각을 해서 작업을 하게 되었는데 우리가 흔히 이제 기억 속에 있는 그리고 지금도 존재하고 있는 그 초록 색깔 부직포로 되어 있는 게시판을 저는 이제 그린 스크린이라고 생각을 해서 뭔가 벼와 뭔가 옹달샘의 요소 하나하나를 뭔가 탈부착시킬 수 있는 어떤 게시판의 작업을 만들게 되었고 저한테는 그 이야기를 계속 생각해 보면서 뭔가 그 제가 가지고 있는 그리고 사람들이 흔히 얘기하는 뭐 한국인은 밥심으로 산다든지 혹은 어디든지 밥을 먹어야 산다든지 이런 얘기가 자꾸 떠올랐는데 그런 어떤 고정된 밥, 쌀밥 혹은 벼라는 그런 이미지와 또 상반되는 어떤 그 벼 농사 혹은 쌀이 굉장한 깊은 시간 동안 축적된 또 전파하는 어떤 스토리들이 있을 텐데 그런 것들과 함께 생각하면서 또 이번 전시를 참여하게 됐던 것 같고 그리고 이번에 그 비엔날레를 통해서 새로 제작한 그 게시판 구비와 비탈 외 5점의 작업은 제가 관념산수 혹은 추상산수라고 주장하는 작업인데요. 지금은 파티션의 형태로 서 있지만 그 제작을 할 당시에는 눕혀서 제작을 해요. 유리판 혹은 뭐 금속과 같은 좀 그 굉장히 미끄러운 재질의 판을 눕혀서 또 비슷한 재질의 그 판 사이에 그 검정색 점성이 있는 잉크를 놓고 그 판을 움직이고 어떤 방향으로 이제 뜯어내느냐에 따라서 그 점성이 가진 액체가 우연적이고 혹은 자연적인 어떤 프랙탈 같은 그런 가지 같은 그런 패턴을 형성을 하는데요. 파티션이라는 작업에서는 예를 들어서 뭐 도깨비 도로와 같이 어떤 착시나 믿음으로 인해서 생기는 어떤 공간이라든지 혹은 뭐 허공이라든지 아니면 뭐 굉장히 깊은 산 속에 구비와 비탈이 우거진 그런 시공간이라든지 혹은 뭐 혼돈 혹은 정말 그 난장판 그 자체 그런 것들을 어떻게 매핑할 수 있을까? 이런 질문으로부터 또 출발한 작업이기도 합니다.
Thank you, guys. That was first of all, thank you for being here and for sharing so much about your work. I'm going to start by proposing some general questions. Each of you can answer if you want or chime in and maybe bounce off each other's comments. So maybe we can start by a more general statement about the commonalities amongst your works. In different ways, you'll engage with the different entanglements between colonialism and extractivism in the ways that you deal with ancestral, modern, and contemporary history, but also in the way you deal with materials and the displacements of like geological displacements, material displacements, or cultural or epistemological displacements, right, in relation to these broad entanglements that we have inherited. And through these entanglements or exploring these entanglements, you tap into some obscured or situated histories of media as well. So these ideas, these entanglements are present both in the topics and histories that you deal with, but also in the materials present in your works in different ways. And going back to the title of this gathering, this roundtable, Past Futurisms, I like to think that these entanglements lead us to propose alternative, or at least, again, displaced visions or ideas for the future. More local, in a way, and based on a different idea of media and history, different usages of media as well. So first of all, I wanted to know if this idea of the past futurisms resonates with you in any way, what kind of images this brings up in your work, and how it relates to your use or interpretation of technology and media.
Now, I would also like to add the use of tools, not only materials, but the tools that are used to...
Technology,
right,
in a broad sense.
Exactly, that are brought to organize these resources or classify them. And in a way, it feels that all of us have quite a critical view on the way these tools have been used or misused to assess this. I don't really like to call it resource because it has already an implication of extraction in it, but perhaps these entities that are present with us. In my case, for example, it is a critical view of both the cartography, the cartographer hand, which typically was a man also. There are maybe just one or two female cartographers in history, that resulting in a publication, in a book, in a map that used to be what we would use to move around. And then GPS took it out of place, so another technology, and now AI, and its unknown future, right? But also, Nolan, you mentioned the museum as a site of production, in which I quite relate a lot, because in my case, my work is happening as the days go by as well. And this also makes me think about the museum as a device, as a space for dialogue, but also production, or how has it been a space for extraction as well, in terms of the kind of histories or archetypes that perhaps you are bringing up, Ximena, in your work?
I was just thinking about, like for example, in some field visits that I've done for making work in video, I also work in video, like the idea of copper extraction, especially in Chile and in Peru, which were like the main providers, the second main providers after Chile of copper to China, and basically how in this field trip I was talking with the local communities, and they were, it's like an open pit mine, like I don't know, 5,200 meters above sea level, and they were referring to their to this hole as where they inhabited before, and it was to me pretty like shocking how they refer to their history and their culture as this empty hole that has been eaten away somehow, and so yeah, like a place of rewriting like a new history. And well, a lot of my works reflect on that, like in extractivism and in trying to find other ways of giving back these resources that have been taken away from people and have been like completely destroying their landscape that have like very like symbolic and cultural value.
But the title of this gathering is Past Futurism, no? So I keep on thinking about our practices that are taking past or histories or her stories and and then thinking about the future, but without the destruction of the past. Maybe just a different proposition of how to continue with this past with us, not just, okay, no more the past, now let's think about the future, but actually embracing this past. Because for example, in my work, this was very evident because I didn't sand the pages back to white. I could have, but I stopped right before because I didn't want the book to become white, as in an erasure of what has been done, but leaving the ghost and proposing, but from that ghost, so that there's still something from where to learn or from where to begin, not just back to zero.
When I think about past futurisms, I think of this South African poet whose work is really important to my practice, Garrido-Lecca, but he writes about, or he proposes this term, past, present, future, one word. And this is really important to my sense of what we're doing, you know, that the past, the present, and the future are not in a kind of linear progression. The future is not so far away. The past is not behind us. The present is not this privileged viewpoint, but that we're in a landscape where these three things are constantly interacting. You know, I think about geology, and in geology, time is read vertically. You dig down and you go deeper back into time. Kind of in astronomy as well, it's vertical. You look up at the stars and you see back in time. And geography is this kind of timeless image, this kind of superficial, horizontal. But I think both like that work, Atopia Field, and thinking about these maps which exist more as kind of dreams, they kind of complicate this question. And I think Agustina's work does a similar thing, that the map, this kind of superficial, horizontal image of the world, can also contain its own qualities of time which are uncertain. You know, the maps, as I read them in your work, are both like a document of some kind of historical media, but also being in the apparatus, a kind of proposition for something unknown, you know, like some kind of digital landscape, and then in an even more, for me, like even more powerful way, it questions like what our relationship is to this, you know? There's the work, there's the apparatus, there's all of this stuff that that kind of implicates time, but we are also agents in this moment, and we carry with us our own kind of temporal propositions, you know? So yeah.
I don't know, maybe it's interesting to mention that like how I work every time, like also, for example, the video Where the Heart Goes originally was 30 minutes long, but then afterward, like every time I need to do for the installation or for the performance, I re-edit it and then it just transforms. And also the elements or material that I use is, there's no like old material or like the new material, but then I guess we share the way of working, like remixing or webbing. So yeah, I want to mention like the way of how we work.
Because I kind of think around where do we consume images of what the future will look like, and outside of the walls of the museum, you know, what kind of mass media representations there are of the future, and you know, are they coming from? They're basically kind of media or advertising from these big companies, from Netflix, from your Apples, and they often try to divorce themselves from history, the representations that they kind of are putting out there of the future. Because if you dig a little bit deeper and you see that these companies and structures didn't come out of nowhere, out of the genius brainchild of Steve Jobs or whoever, then you can kind of retrace all of these companies back to historical processes that, basically need covering up for the fantasy to kind of survive. And so the work that I'm really interested in doing more of is to kind of decentralize that and to make, the imagining of the future be something that is active in terms of being kind of promoted in spaces of making, and where young people feel empowered to tell their stories and to be, just to feel emboldened to kind of like be able to imagine what they would like the future to be in their specific context, and not to have that be something that is just kind of force-fed from elsewhere.
To add on to, there was a discussion on how the museum is a site of production. At the same time, also thinking about that for me has a non-linear, non-linear productive mode. But at the same time, within that productive mode, there's also that moment of non-productiveness also, which I really admire. And one can think of it as a moment of glitch, right? That's where the humanness also comes in. And it's also something that I was informed by their stories or animistic ideas that I grew up in understanding also, where certain like agencies, they not translated, but they reformulated themselves into different forms, and all this, this somewhat like informs certain agencies also. And at the same time, like the productive and the production moment also is not just in the making of the work, but it's also when individuals just comes in, and that's where their epistemological ideas of understanding also is in that moment of production also for me.
Thank you. I was thinking about picking up on all the things that you have been mentioning, how all of your works map out or bring up territoriality, but in a way that manages to bring time into it, whether it be in ancestral times or imaginary utopian times, like in the case of Nolan, or this kind of bridging time within the work itself, like Agustina's work, or even bringing it to another non-time between the virtual and the real, as in Yoon's work. And I like that the idea of ghosts came up before, because in a way, this idea of like, we could think of maybe a ghostly time that comes up in all of your works. This can be interpreted in many ways. So maybe you can talk a little bit about how you situate your works in different contexts and what it's been for you. All of you have been working here at least a few days, situating your works in the Korean context, and what has this been like for you?
It's the second time actually that I conceived this work in Seoul, which is amazing experience. But this second moment, that's when I kind of feel the soul somehow. It was also about the rhythm that I was trying to understand, and there were crevices that I was open to also, and it opened up itself to me. What was really inspiring actually was also to understand like several materials that I was looking at, in specific like the polyvinyl especially. It was here that the technology or the technique of that making was actually accelerated further also. And initially it was just a hyperbole. It was a it was a speculation that I made, like, is this in Singapore or somewhere else in China? But in actuality, the technology that was produced, conceived, and researched was also done here. And looking into like the components of that material itself, like it brought me, okay, so it makes sense to kind of like reconceive it here. But at the same time, also there were several individuals who like really assisted in the production process of it. One of them, definitely the art handlers, who I really think of them as another agents, who are also themselves teachers, and I constantly learn from watching also of the technique that they use to install the most simplest thing like a vinyl even. Because like in the context of like where I'm from in Singapore, it's just once you paste it and that's done. But at the same time also there were conversations briefly that we discussed about how do we pull it out and what are the methods and ways that we can conserve it also for the next method, post-production moment of that exercise, if one would think of it. Because I constantly reuse these vinyls also. And what's also interesting, like to think about the differences, is that there's several thicknesses in comparing the materials that we used where we're in Singapore to here, because the components of the adhesive layer is much stronger and it's thicker. So when it was sliced, you really had to dig into that layers to just pull it out and re-stitch it again and again. Yeah, so I mean, it was this different kind of stratus of understanding, and I understand actually like there's a practice of cutting within the society here, which from the community that I'm in, like we don't have that idea, but also like at the same time, we constantly rely on, I mean, there's this tool or apparatus that is used, and I think majority individuals would know, if one were to read ethnography, it's called the crease. So the crease is like a weapon that's used within the Malay society, and I think of it as an energy keeper, and there's several scholars who actually mentioned about like it's almost like a thumb drive that just wheels out an energy into it, but there's never a translation of it being used as an art making tool. And it was only here that I realized like, okay, there was that moment that I could just like dance with, you know. So yeah, it was that rhythm again.
The notion of time in my work and in my practice in general is central. Sometimes truly looking into the fabrication of time as an infrastructure, and some other times truly embracing time as a process, which is what we see here. It has been a very surprisingly meditative process to sand an entire atlas for an entire year with a team of 8 people, because I couldn't do it on my own. I didn't know that this would happen, but after sanding for 8 hours for 3 days in a row, I couldn't move my arm because I started having wrist pain. I didn't know that tendinitis existed. Then I found out. And this pushed me to invite other people to come and sand with me. And this collective practice of what we called angiography lessons was both a community of unlearning, but also of sharing time. And this sharing of time became a very meditative process, something that I found when I walked last Friday into a temple, because I was just drawn into it by the chanting. And this chanting was very much what we lived through in the entire year of just listening to the of the sandpaper. Sometimes we will sand in silence for days without listening to music, just really getting lost in the rhythm of sanding, and there wasn't a way of sanding properly. We all had to figure out which was the best way for each one of us to just move around and just do this. And so time became a shared space, and it's sort of like folded space-time. So in this meditative, I think that is this like embracing of meditation. I found it here in Korea. And I'm very glad that this is the first time I'm actually presenting this work, even though the book was done 10 years ago. I've never shown it before, and it's quite interesting also to show it in such a political context like Korea is. And I talk about Korea as a whole country, you know, both the condition of the territory in the north and in the south, and to exhibit this kind of work in this context for the first time also sort of contextualized the maybe irrelevance of this book or the irrelevance of such borders. Back to the conversation of time, in the work, in the digital component of the work that I am exhibiting, there is also a replication of the erosion that was done by hand. So we are intercepting the artificial intelligence with a script that we wrote that is eroding in fact, the latent space, which is where the artificial intelligence is making its connections to come up with a new map. So there is another sense of erosion that comes back into the work. And I like to think about erosion also as a process of time. Erosion, and the reason why I sanded the maps was in fact to mimic a condition that exists in the planet. I could have done anything else to the book, but there was a necessity to enact something that is already happening in the planet. And this attitude was also then brought to the digital sphere by eroding the AI, and that's the reason why the results are so abstracted, is because we are, every day that time passes in this show, this AI is slowly being eroded. So there's also something maybe quite geological in this process, both what was done in the book and then what is being done constantly and daily.
I think this question of the context is a really important one. And I think at least for me, any time a work travels, it always must change, you know? Even if it's a painting, the kind of context transforms the significance, the implication of the work, and that means it requires a lot of trust. Like where the work goes takes responsibility for the meaningfulness of the work. And for these two works that I'm showing in the biennial, I feel like that question has been on the front of my mind the entire time. And for me, the context is not so much a geographic question, but a social question. And my, let's say, mediator, interlocutor for understanding the context and moving through the context has been Hyewan Lee, who's an assistant curator working on the biennial. And we've, for months and months leading up to this biennial, been working on a few different things. One, maybe the big one, is this question of translation, translating the words in the diagram into Korean. And I've never done this before, but through conversations with Sofía and with Hyewan, the possibility of doing this in a kind of meaningful way became apparent to me. So that's kind of one level, which then also allows the work maybe to invite people to do what we were talking about, like lie down and walk over the work and feel somehow that there's an invitation in the work. The other part, or the other work, let's say, also requires constant care and maintenance. It's a work that is working for the next 60-odd days, and that means that the work is part of the kind of everyday processes of labor that happen in the museum. So the museum guards, who kind of fade into the background in this work, are asked to step forward and periodically remove a rock, or if the machine fails, like start it over again, restart the machine, start printing new rocks, and also deciding which rocks to print. And this seems kind of simple, but it's been a big, not a drama, but it's been like a process of trying to find the right, let's say, protocol to do this in a smooth way. This is like another level of collaboration and kind of contextualization of the work, which would absolutely not be possible without Herwan's intervention. And I think this, for me, is also a really important part of that work. I mean, we've been speaking about the museum as a site of production, but there are also other forms of labor that happen in a museum. There's a museum as a site of care, of maintenance, and I think the possibility of both asking the museum to do more care and more labor and more maintenance on this work, and also feeling safe that this work will be cared for in this institution, is really about the way that not the geographic context, but the social context has been configured through your work, Sofía, and the work of the institution. So,
yeah, I would like to second your thought, because in my case, there's also an added amount of labor coming from the museum by tendering to the book and bringing it back to page 1 every day. And again, it does feel simple. However, this simple gesture of bringing every day the book back to page 1 carries an entire manual of operations, which is maybe 10 pages long, on how to do this. And these are also kind of like the invisible work and the invisible time that is behind each of these works, at least in our cases, Nolan, which does asks a bit more from the museum, but also it asks for their labor, but in a way it's also an invitation to collaborate. I see it this way. It's an invitation to be a part of it and to build it together. So there's a trust is at the center of these works, both from them to us and from us to them.
사실 제가 계속해서 주목하고 있는 대상들은 어떤 마음이 가는 것들이라고 할 수 있는데 그런 것들은 뭔가 아른거림이랑 좀 관련이 되는 것 같아요. 영어로 아까 이제 고스트 얘기 나왔으니까 뭔가 haunted or ghost related to that. 근데 그런 아른거리는 대상들이 시각적으로 눈앞에 아른거리는 것뿐만 아니라 뭐 청각적으로 혹은 뭐 후각적으로 계속 아른거리는 것들을 계속해서 작업에서 끌어온다고 생각을 하는데 어제 참여 작가 켄트와 보왕이랑 얘기를 하면서 켄트가 그랬던 것 같은데 왜 계속 만나는 사람들마다 다 서울 사람이냐고 이렇게 저한테 묻더라고요. 네, 뭔가 저는 그 서울에 대한 그 맥락에 대한 질문을 주셨으니까 이 전시랑 연관시켜서 뭔가 한국 사회에서 또 다른 범위의 뭔가 이주, 이동 혹은 디아스포라에 대해서 얘기를 할 때 저 또한 뭔가 서울 사람이지만 제주에서 자랐고 서울로 이동했거든요. 그래서 제가 그냥 답변으로 굉장히 많은 사람들이 다 서울로 이주를 하고 이동을 하는 어떤 사회다. 굉장히 서울 중심적인 이 영토에서 뭔가 나라 간의 이동뿐만 아니라 도시 간의 이동이 굉장히 많이 일어나는 곳이고 그리고 꼭 물리적인 이동뿐만 아니라 어떤 곳에서 뭔가 굉장히 많은 제약과 혹은 장벽으로 둘러싸인 어떤 곳에서 일어날 수 있는 어떤 심리적인 이동들, 어떤 집단의 어떤 심리적인 이탈들이 많이 일어날 수 있다고 생각하는데 그런 점들을 이번 전시를 통해서 더 혹은 또 제 작업을 통해서 좀 이야기를 해보고 싶었어요.
Yeah, that's a lot of what your work is about. The psychological escape. Okay, thank you so much. This has been a super interesting discussion, and I think this really brings a lot to the context of the biennial and for everyone to continue to explore it. Now we would love to welcome some questions from you in the audience.
네, 얘기 잘 들었습니다. 그 마지막에 최윤 작가님이 그 엔딩으로 말씀하신 psychological escape에 대해서 연관지어서 생각해보고 싶은 게 있는데 모든 작가분들이 다 각각의 다른 작업들을 지금 보여주시지만 지금 주제가 past futurism이라고 하셨잖아요. 근데 뭐 예를 들어서 뭐 최윤 작가님께서 말씀하셨던 뭐 real가 virtual이라던가 아니면은 또 어떤 테크놀로지에 반하여 뭐 다시 과거의 어떤 페미니즘에 대해서 생각을 한다거나 아니면은 서구에서 만들었던 것을 그 지도를 약간의 어떤 캔슬링의 액션을 했다 다시 AI로 변화를 한다거나 아니면은 그 뭐 이모지라든가 또 그 e-waste라는 것도 쓰시면서 하면서 보니까 어떤 식으로나마 이 지금 현대사회에서 이런 퓨처라고 불리우는 그런 어떤 그런 장치들을 작업에 반영을 하면서 크리틱을 하면서 또 한편으로는 그것을 굉장히 좋아하면서 할 수밖에 없는 그러면서 결국에는 그 psychological escape이 가능한 것인지 결국에 어떤 정도 저는 실패라는 단어가 계속 생각이 났어요. 계속 여러분들의 이야기를 들으면서 이런 실패의 모먼트들을 계속 셀러브레이션을 하는 작업들이 아닌가 이런 생각이 들어서 질문이 조금 명확하지는 않은데 그래서 결국 이런 실패를 어떻게 받아들이고 그것을 통해서 어떤 사이콜로지컬 이스케이프를 하시는지 그런 부분이 좀 궁금해졌습니다.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think I've always been kind of drawn to the margins, and I've always felt very uncomfortable kind of in centers. Kind of going back to the previous question by Sofía, it's been a very positive experience being at the museum, and I've got absolutely no complaints, and everyone was very helpful and all of that. At the same time, being here fills me with kind of a degree of sadness, I guess, that back in the global south or in southern Africa, I suppose, there's very few institutions like this that have that give artists the space to kind of do work like this that isn't necessarily commercial, and yeah, I'm drawn to kind of the messiness of that and how that in South Africa, where I'm from, I feel like the messiness of the world is within the borders of that country. All of the dynamics are there. There's huge inequality, there's huge wealth, there's extraction, there's big cities, there's industry, there's migration, everything's there. So I feel like it's a type of battleground for the future in South Africa, and in places where, you know, resources that are, we talk about labor inside of the museum, but also what labor is kind of invisible from outside of the museum. So yeah, I know the work that I'm presenting is kind of quite a pessimistic view of the world, and I made it a few years ago, and I'm kind of trying to spend my time on other ventures these days. Yeah, but trying to kind of be comfortable in the messiness and in the ugliness of the world. Not comfortable, but to kind of force myself to be immersed in that has been kind of an approach, I suppose. But it's not always a nice place to be. Yeah, I don't know if that's an answer either.
I was also thinking, like, in this process of like cultural erasure that it's happening, no? There is also like I like to think about this kind of process of adaptation, not only like, you know, in a way how these cultures are kind of adapting and they're trying to finding new ways of survival and new ways of kind of relating to their culture, and new adaptable forms are surging from this as well, you know, and I find that like a kind of a positive thing to see or seek or see. I don't know. I kind of see myself kind of in a neutral position somehow, like I don't know, like a chronicler, like observing my surrounding and kind of absorbing what's around, and I don't know, like.
Adding on to that question, thank you for the beautiful question. There were moments that I actually thought it was a psychological escape, but at the same time, it was more of a psychological structuring, if one can think of it that way, and reorganizing. This is also from the conversations that I have with the collaborators who conceive with me in the production of this work, or any works that I produce also. And the constant goal to feel is at the core, or any motivation of the work from the start. It also was informed by the context that I'm based in Singapore, because like in the social status, it's like one has to be successful to live, you know, and you know, just wanting to commit to the process of living as an artist is actually a failure in life, or just being a human also. And what I conceive also is also like a gathering of individuals who come with that idea that they are not there to escape, but to think about new methods and strategies to move past a certain stereotype that we have to commit to, or what the state had made you to become. So I think of it as a moment of deprogramming also. And there were moments that we thought of it as a psychological escape, but I think, like, you know, hearing what you said about just listening to nature. So there was one moment of an exercise that we constantly was just listening to a dugem beat in the studio for 4 hours every day. But at the same time, we kind of got tired of just listening to music, so we just went all natural mode and hand cut all this thing together, and became like a meditative thing. But each moment after we conceive or work together, that's when we sit down, have dinner, and ask each other, like, do you feel, was it an escapism or whatnot? But we all believe that it was not, because there's never actually a moment that you can escape, even in art making, because it's work. like, but there's that crevice of just wanting to feel from not performing to what a state wants you to, so that was that moment, I guess.
Psychological escape or is it hyperconnectivity? Completely the opposite. The just ultimate state of the present instead of the escaping of it in the process of creation. The work is not the book. The book is a result, almost unexpected and really not planned. The work itself was the time spent sanding the book. And the work in the virtual version is the time that the AI is being eroded. The outcome is just almost accidental in a way. And in this, I would refer to failure as a lesson and to the glitch as a possibility. And the future not as being in love of the future, but actually the future as an inevitable present, absolutely. And in terms of my personal role, I perceive myself more as a journalist than an artist in a way. I'm really not creating anything new here. I'm just presenting the reality we have in a different way, but I'm not making anything new. I'm just separating the parts, almost in a very archaeological method.
I have a friend, Italian curator, who on this question of failure gets like really angry. And he says something like, with the work that we do, failure does not come into the equation. If anything, we're in the, like in face of impossible odds, let's say, in face of working on things which are irresolvable, technical and spiritual and political irresolvability. We work in the production of miracles, which is a very like Catholic, but I think it's an important intervention because I don't think it's the idea of failure that kind of animates practice. Failure is maybe too soon to even talk about failure. We don't know, and you work in, and I wouldn't say faith because I'm not a Catholic, but we work in the kind of the confidence that this is the work that needs to be done. And what comes, like Agustina says, will come, that's not the work. Yeah.
We have time for one more short question, if anybody has it. Yes.
My question isn't as complicated or as beautiful as my professor's, but just a question that me and my friends have as young artists. When we do our work, it's still based on our daily life, just emotions and experiences, just personal things, but this whole concept of this exhibition and your works are more on like the whole world, environment or political stuff, and maps. So I was wondering what got you to think about those or connect yourself personally to those thoughts? Like, was it always about that large range, or were your past works zeroed onto smaller matters?
I can respond in a very pragmatic way. I found this book in the garbage on my way to my house. So this was my everyday also. I just happened to be quite inspired by the visual of seeing the Times Atlas of the World in the garbage in the corner. that to me, and just maybe that was the work itself. And so I took a picture of that. And then I realized, wait, I'm an artist. Maybe I should take that book with me to my studio and think about that image. And that then developed into the work. I wasn't meaning to talk about the entire planet at all. That came about while making the work, having an entire year of the process of it. And 10 years later, here I am back again with the same work, and I am looking at it from a different position also. Also relating to my very personal experience, when I found this book in the garbage, I didn't find it in my hometown. I found it in the United States, and I am originally from Argentina. And today, looking back at that moment, I would think that it is very much my history also that is informing me or opening up my eyes to take a picture to an atlas in the garbage. I think that is very much related to my own movement, to my thinking about space, public space, personal space, home space, intimate space. So maybe just also as an advice to you, the starting point doesn't have to be so huge. In fact, personally, it was a very personal, just on my way to my house. And then the reflection comes, or just the process takes you there.
Well, I think that there's many different methodologies of making work. For my personal experience, I think that, well, apart from like the background that you grow in, I think that definitely kind of affects the way you make work and who you are, but also I think in a kind of exercise way of kind of getting inspired. I mostly did a lot of research trips and field works and just traveling around and you know, like talking to people. That generally works. And then one thing leads to another, and it's not like you have a fixed idea. Many times you don't have like a very fixed idea of the final result. It's like a process that it's in a continuous change. And the final result sometimes is completely different to what you thought originally is going to be. So that is also part of the process of making art, I think, personally.
뭔가 저는 그냥 먼지 한 톨을 보더라도 이 먼지가 어디서 왔고 뭐 이게 이렇게 질문이 계속 이어지곤 하는데 미세한 작은 것들이 엄청나게 거시적인 세계와 또 연결돼 있다고 생각을 하거든요. 그래서 저 또한 뭔가 엄청나게 거대한 문제들을 먼저 그런 주제로 접근한다기보단 항상 생활과 개인사와 그런 것들이 계속 연결되어 있는 상태에서 분리되지 않은 상태에서 작업을 해 나가고 있는 거 있습니다.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you, everyone, for staying with us this afternoon. Our program continues throughout the day, so I will invite you to stick around. We have a performance by Jay Ree, Arizona Cowboy, at 5 on the 3rd floor. And then I invite you to get back here for our program, Frequency Tropics, curated by Ken Chan and Seoul Community Radio. We'll listen to some music, maybe dance a little bit. So please stick around.